Again, for those just joined, welcome to the Power of Listening series. I am Shanta Averhart, the Greater Chicago Vice President. I was Vice President, but now President, serving in my second term with Greater Chicago. This year, we have chosen listen as one of our touchstones to focus on. So we encourage you to listen with more than just your ears. Strive to be an active listener who truly possesses what is being conveyed and learns from others through their words. By listening with your heart as well as your head, you'll build lasting relationships, strengthen your core hurt, and help those around you grow. So today, Andrea will be discussing the power of listening, and this is the first series. We're going to have two more, so save the date on Wednesday, July 23rd. Do you see what I'm saying? And then Wednesday, September the 24th, we'll conclude it with Listen, Learn, and Lead. So we definitely look forward to embarking on this journey with all of you and exploring the transformative power of listening together. So Andrea, I'll let you go ahead and take over. Thanks for joining, everyone.
Thank you. All right, let me share my screen and get to some, whoops. All righty, I think everybody can see it. Share, slideshow, present view. Okay, everybody seeing okay?
Yes.
I take that as a yes. Okay, great. So let's kind of jump right in. So again, I'm Andrea Oden, and I'm a high performance coach. And if we are meeting for the very first time, I'm here to help you unlock your full potential as a high performing leader. What I do is simple, but very, very powerful. I help leaders come out of the shadows and onto the main stages of their organization. Basically, I help leaders get seen, get known, and get paid. So for the last 20 years, I have helped leaders transform their careers using the same game-changing strategies and principles that I used to grow my career from secretary to well-respected HR director, to a six-figure consultant, and finally to CEO of Air Network. And Air Network, much like WICT, is on a mission to empower women. I'm thrilled today to kick off the first of this three-part series where we are going to dive into one of the most underrated superpowers of leadership, and that is listening. And not just listening to what's being said, but listening to hear the future. This is about listening to anticipate, listening so that you can lead with vision and you're able to create extraordinary impact. So let's get ready to step into the next level of greatness by learning to effectively listen. Okay? So why are we talking about listening? Isn't that something that we just do every day without even thinking about it? Well, yes and no. While we may physically listen and physically hear the words that are being spoken to us, true listening goes deeper than that. True listening is about being fully present, actively engaged, and truly understanding the meaning behind the words. As leaders, your ability to listen isn't just a skill, it's a secret weapon that can transform teams and your career. Leaders who listen, who really and truly listen, are the leaders that everybody really wants to follow. Over the next three sessions, I'm going to share with you the method of listening. And yes, there is a method to it. And it's more impactful, but easier than you might think. I'm going to share some strategies for how we listen to people. And you'll also learn how to listen to your company, because your organization is telling you everything you need to thrive, but only if you know how to hear it. And finally, you're going to learn how to listen to the future. and yes, I did say future, there is a way that you can position yourself so that you're always prepared for what's coming next. So before we get started, I want to have a pop quiz. And don't worry, there's no right or wrong answers. The only person that's going to hear your answers is you, because you're going to take this pop quiz subliminally. So I'm going to ask the questions, and they're all true or false. So I want you to answer honestly to yourself. True or false? Yeah. True or false? I often get distracted by my own thoughts during conversations with others. When speaking with others, I turn off my phone and I give them my full attention. Next question. I tend to make quick judgments while listening to someone share. True or false? I make a conscious effort to never interrupt someone who's speaking. True or false? I hold back my opinion or my advice unless I'm specifically asked for it. True or false? I sometimes think about my response while the other person is still talking. I ask thoughtful questions to better understand the other person's perspective. True or false? Okay. Final question. I pay close attention to the speaker's body language. So how'd you do? Without even knowing the answers from what you said to yourself, here's what I do know. You are not a good listener. And neither am I. We all struggle with this thing called listening. And so now that we've determined pretty much that we all are bad listeners, we're going to look at this differently, right? We're going to look first and foremost at the different types of listeners. I believe that leaders can be grouped into 8 distinct categories based on their listening styles. Okay? And here are all 8 of the listening types. So we're going to take a look at each of them. And I want you to think about yourself and who you know, because we learn from each other in how to listen, which is probably why we don't do it so well. But when you know what the categories are and the different types, you get to understand how you are showing up and how you're listening. So first and foremost is the multitasking listener. This listener is very easy to spot because they're doing other things. Sometimes they're tapping their foot, looking at their watch, looking around the room. Some of you today, right now during this training, you're multitasking. You're checking emails. You might be pulling up Facebook, but you are a multitasking listener. These listeners come across sometimes as rushed, disengaged, and eager to move on to the next thing. Multitaskers are always juggling, and you're trying to talk to them, but their focus seems to be someplace else. So who do we know? I won't say who do we know. I'll say, do we know any multitasking listeners, right? Next, there's the interrupter. The interrupter has a habit of cutting you off mid-sentence, disrupting the flow of the conversation. They seem to be impatient, maybe believing that what they have to say is more important than what you're saying. So rather than actively listening, the interrupter's kind of waiting for a pause so that they can jump in. Often they finish your sentences assuming that they already know where the conversation is going. And this habit can be frustrating and very counterproductive. Which brings us to the selective listener. Selective listeners only pay attention to parts of the conversation, and it's usually the parts that align with their own interests or their own agenda. They can catch the big picture, but they often miss the details, requiring frequent reminders of important points. They're engaged in just pieces of the conversation, but they fail to fully absorb everything that you're saying. What about the my turn listener? Much like the interrupter, this person really isn't listening, right? They're biding their time until it's their turn to speak. Most of the my turn listeners has already figured out where they're going with the conversation. And while they might be nodding along, they're really nodding to hurry you up, right? Because they're crafting their own point of view rather than engaging with what you're saying. And as a result, their responses often miss the subtle nuances of the conversation. Everybody knows this kind of leader, especially if you are the parent of a teenager. This is the combative listener. The combative listener's approach to conversation is usually from a defensive or even a hostile standpoint. They're not listening to understand. They are listening to find flaws. They're listening for the disagreement, or they're listening for ammunition that they can use to push back. They thrive on conflict, and they often shift the blame, or they escalate the discussion into an argument. And conversations with the combative listener can feel aggressive and draining. This is the just the facts listener. This type of listener has little regard for the individual or the context of the situation. They're solely focused on the facts. They fail to realize that emotions are facts for the person having them. This type of listener often responds to your concerns with really dismissive phrases. They'll say things like, well, that's just how it is, or that's what the company's doing, so that's where we're going, right? I don't know what to tell you, right? And then if you say how you feel about something, they say something like, well, that's not true. They have very little interest in building a connection with you or responding to your feelings. And if the words that you start to say convey any kind of emotion, anything other than hard, cold facts, they tune you out. Number 7 is the action hero listener. The action hero listener is always on the lookout for a problem they can solve for you. While they're listening, their attention is focused on identifying the issue and jumping in so they can solve it. They often cut the conversation short, or they offer advice and they say things like, look, I'll take that, or give me that. I'll do that for you. I'll take it from here, right? Their intentions might be good to solve the problem and help you, but their approach often feels dismissive or overly solution focused. And it doesn't encourage the speaker to grow because they're solving the problem. This listener will swoop in with their cape on and forever save the day. And finally, we have the empath listener. The empath is truly in tune with the emotions and the experiences of others. They listen with genuine care, and they strive to understand the speaker's perspective and their feelings. Their presence is often really, really comforting and reassuring. They're good at creating a safe space for others to open up. However, empaths can sometimes struggle to separate their own emotions from those of the other person. And this causes the conversation to shift towards them and their feelings. Have you ever had a conversation with somebody and you tell them your problem and they immediately start to tell you about something similar that happened to them? And then a few minutes later, they're experiencing that thing in themselves all over again, pulling you into it, and they're emotional, but not about the problem you brought, but they're emotional about whatever happened to them. And when an empath does this, it lacks a solution focus. It's all about the feelings, nothing about what's really going on. And usually it's not even about you. Okay? So what is a good listener? Simon Sinek tells us the difference between hearing and listening. I want to play a clip and see if it'll go up for us today and see what happens.
Listening is about holding space. It's not about agreeing or disagreeing. It's about creating a space in which the other person can feel heard. That's the only goal, right? Responding doesn't always have to be in the immediate, because sometimes when you're in that listening space, it's highly emotional, and the thing that we want to do is correct the facts. Please don't do that, right? So I'll give you two examples. One is a personal one, one's a professional one. The first one is a friend of mine who works for a Fortune 10, Fortune 50 company, had an issue with an employee. It got escalated up to HR. HR got involved and told them that they needed to sit in a room and talk this out, and HR was going to be in the room with them, right? Fairly normal in a large corporate environment. So my friend, who was the one who was in the leadership position, who was told that she was being a bad leader, called me up and said, "How do I do this meeting?" And I explained that all that the person needs is to feel heard. That is the total goal of this meeting, I know that she's seeing the situation differently. I know that it's not exactly as she said it to me. I know that there's facts that need to be corrected. All true. This space is only for you to let her feel heard. That's it. They went into the meeting, and my friend practiced her listening skills. Go on, tell me more, what else? Go on, tell me more, what else? Until her teammate had nothing else to say. And at the end of that, my friend said, "How do you feel?" And she said, "Thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time to hear me. I really appreciate it." And that should have been the end of the meeting. HR said, "Didn't you have something you wanted to tell her?" And my friend's like, no, I'm good. And HR's like, no, you have to, HR literally was about to break it. But they created this container. And the time for fact correcting can come a couple of days later. Like, to go up to her and be like, "Can I have another meeting with you? I thought about what you said, and can I share with you some of my reactions?" Because now she's in a rational space. So here's what happened to me that proves the case. I went to see a friend of mine's play. She was an actor in the play. It was easily the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. If I could have walked out twice, I would have. But I couldn't. I had to endure the whole mess because my friend was in the play. At the end of the play, I'm waiting in the lobby, and, with parents and friends, and waiting for my friend to come out. And she comes out. She's still in makeup. She's still jacked up on adrenaline from being on stage. She knows me to be an honest broker, and she says to me, "What did you think?" Now is not the time. But I can't lie. So I said, "It was so magical to come and see you do your thing. I've never seen you on stage before, and it was really a thrill for me to come and see you do your thing." True. Thank you. Oh my God, thank you for coming. Crisis averted. 2 days later, I called her up. Adrenaline has gone. Emotions are normal. And I said, "Can I tell you what I thought?" She said, "Sure, of course." And I told her very honestly I thought the directing was weak, I thought the script was weak, and she was like, "Yeah," and we had a rational conversation about it. And so I think one of the things we forget in listening and responding is we think it all has to be at the same time. It doesn't. The first part is the emotional part. We don't teach that listening skill to create a space in which someone can empty their bucket and feel heard. And then if there's any facts that need to be corrected or conversation needs to happen, it can happen a day or two later when somebody feels good, and we can actually have a rational conversation. Because very often we mix the two, and they're oil and water. So I think we need to teach the skills. I mean, these are all skills. I did not have them in the past, and I'm still working on them now, but I'm better than I used to be because I learned the skills. Listening is about...
So what are the skills? There are 3 rules to listening. Right? First and foremost, creating space. Second, holding space. And third, leave space. So how do we create space? Creating space is all about being fully present in the conversation. This is the only part that's about you. This means setting aside distractions, putting down your phone, turning off notifications, and focusing entirely on the person in front of you. When you create space, you signal to the other person that their thoughts and their feelings matter. Creating space is about you preparing yourself to come into the conversation. And that's the only thing that's about you. The next one is about holding space. And holding space requires active, compassionate listening without the need to control or fix the situation. It's literally about holding space for the speaker, holding space for their emotions. And this might mean that there's moments of silence where you resist the urge to interrupt, or you resist the urge to get in there and start solving the problem and giving unsolicited advice. Holding space is about holding the safe space that you created and making that space safe for the other person to share, right? And making sure that wherever we are, it's safe here, okay? And finally, leaving space. Leaving space is about leaving the conversation with more understanding than when you entered it. This means reflecting on what was shared before you speak. It means asking meaningful questions that help you better understand. It might be about rephrasing what you just heard. Here's what I heard. And it's about taking something valuable away from the exchange where it allows the person to feel like they've been heard, and not only heard, but understood, right? It's about leaving space for the lessons learned. And it might be about leaving space for the solution, leaving space for another conversation, right? One of the hardest things for me when it comes to listening is I didn't know that you didn't have to respond in the moment. As we saw in the video, it's okay to just be present. I didn't know that I could come back later and have some conversation. You know, I'm in the bed in the middle of the night going, I wish I hadn't said that, or I wish I had said this instead, when it is okay if you've prepared the space and you've created the space, you've held the space, you can leave the space and come back and revisit it if you need to. All right. So now that we know the rules, this is what listening is not, right? Listening is not about agreeing or disagreeing, right? It's not about correcting the facts, because even if we hate to admit it, feelings are someone else's facts. If someone is feeling a certain way, that's a fact for them. And lastly, it's not about you. When you're listening, it's all about the other person. You know, think about times where people have come to you and said, hi, can I talk to you about something? Right? They didn't make that up in the hallway. They literally had time to think about this, whatever it is, it's on their mind, and now they're bringing it to you. It doesn't make sense for you to have the answer. It doesn't make sense for you to have the magic bullet because they've had practice with it and you haven't, right? Listening is all about the other person. And oftentimes the solution to the problem happens organically as the person starts to share. So leaders who listen and listen the right way are the leaders that everybody wants to follow, right? But what happens when nobody's listening to the leader? One of the worst things that can happen in your career is when people stop listening to you, because you can't lead people who don't trust you enough to listen. Let me introduce you to the law of E.F. Hutton. E.F. Hutton was a prominent Wall Street brokerage firm that was founded in 1901. It gained notoriety for its slogan, and its slogan was, when E.F. Hutton talks, people listen. And when it comes to leadership, that's the law of E.F. Hutton. The law of E.F. Hutton says that when the real leader speaks, people listen. The question is, who is the real leader? Meet Miss Betty. I call her Betty Hutton because I found out that when Miss Betty talks, people listen. A few years ago, I was invited to conduct a training session for a team for a senior vice president who was struggling to connect with her team, and it was starting to affect their performance. She'd been hired from outside the organization, and she'd been in a role for over a year, but she hadn't built the trust and rapport necessary, and the team's performance was starting to suffer. So I was brought in to help uncover the problem. So we brought the team together, and to address this, I decided to play this leadership game. And it's a really fun game that's designed to get people talking about how they feel about leadership in general. I began by explaining the rules to the game, and then we did like a practice round. And the practice round is really to help people see how fun it is and that there's no real hidden agenda or anything. So I explain the rules, and then I start to ask questions. And usually I ask the question, somebody raises their hand, but this time that didn't happen. The room fell silent. Nobody said anything. And so I eventually picked someone, and I picked a gentleman, and I asked him to answer the question. But before he starts speaking, he glances over at a woman sitting on the other side of the room. The next time I asked a question, picked someone else, the same thing happened. It happened 4 times. Every time I would ask a question, before they answered, they would look to this woman, right? Now, Miss Betty wasn't mean or rude. She was the most pleasant looking woman. And in fact, she was smiling the whole time. And every time someone gave their answer, she looked proud. She looked so happy for them, right? And so eventually I asked Miss Betty a question. And without hesitation, she responded, and the entire room starts nodding and smiling. It was like she was Oprah, and Oprah had just said something in the room. It became clear to me that Miss Betty was the true leader in this room. Miss Betty was loved and trusted by everybody in the team. She'd been a supervisor with the company for over 25 years. And in that room, there were 20 supervisors, 4 managers, a director, a senior director, a vice president, and me. But Miss Betty, in every sense of the word, was the E.F. Hutton of that room. When she spoke, everybody listened. When she didn't speak, nobody moved. So realizing the dynamic of what's going on, I called for a 15-minute break, gave everybody a chance to get snacks, and I called Miss Betty out into the hallway. And I asked her I explained the rules to the game, and I asked her if she would take over the game. And she said, sure, I'd love to. So we go back in, and the minute Miss Betty stands at the front of the room, the energy shifts. Everything starts to change. People are raising their hands, eager to participate, and we eventually got to the root of the problem. This experience teaches us a really valuable lesson, that leadership isn't about credentials. It's not about your title or your education. True leaders are the ones who earn trust, and they earn influence through listening, through their actions, and their connections with others. True leaders are the people who listen to others, and in turn, people listen to them. Leaders who listen are the leaders that anybody and everybody wants to follow. So who are you listening to? Who is the E.F. Hutton that has your attention? When it comes to your career, who's the E.F. Hutton? Who are you listening to? Because there's a lot of noise going on around us every day. Your job is always to make sure that you are listening, and you're listening to the right people, that you're listening for the right conversations. Okay? Today, we've spent time talking about listening to people. In our next session, we're going to learn how to listen to your company, because believe it or not, your company is speaking. Every day, your company is speaking. In our next session, we're going to talk about how to listen to what your company is saying, and then how to position yourself for what's coming ahead. Inside every organization, there's what's called a business life cycle. This cycle is always evolving in your organization. As long as the organization is still open and functioning, this is what's going on, right? The first step is startup. This is the starting point where the business finds its footing, where it's laying its foundation for future success. Sometimes it's the very beginning of a company, but sometimes it's still part of the evolution, okay? The next step is the growth stage. And this is where the business starts to take momentum. The company is rapidly growing. They're hiring all the time. And all the resources and money is being directed towards expanding their reach and growing the company. The next one is maturity. And the maturity stage is about stabilizing it at that growth space, right? This is about focusing on, now that we're growing, how do we refine processes? How do we optimize efficiency and maintain a strong presence in the marketplace? The next phase or the next cycle is the decline. And it doesn't matter how successful the company, this is an inevitable phase, right? It happens. This is where the company has ceased from continuous mountain growth, right? Where there's a lot of growth in that last stage. Things are starting to level off. And this is where the company is holding steady for a period of time. Things are not getting worse, but we're not growing like we used to. This is where the industry starts to change, or the competition starts to do something different, or the competition gets close to us. This is where the company starts to see the challenges that might threaten the future. Think about Blockbuster, right? This is where some companies get stuck in this decline space and they get lost. You know, Blockbuster, they grew, they matured, but when the industry started to change and their decline started to happen, they did the wrong thing. They did nothing. And what they should have done was moved into the next cycle, which is innovation. And the innovation stage is all about reinvention. Businesses start investing in cutting edge technologies. They start investing in new strategies, and they start having groundbreaking ideas to stay ahead of the change that the industry is experiencing. Sometimes it's about creating new products and ensuring that we're able to stay, keep what we've got and continue to grow. Sometimes it's about how do we innovate? How do we take what we've got and build systems around it, right? This is the reinvention stage, and every company has it. The next and final stage is called scale and expand. And this focuses on strategic expansion into new markets and leveraging the success of the past. So, think Xfinity Mobile, right? But for years it was this way, it's still built on it. But when it's time to scale and expand, we might introduce a new product, right? This is also where you might start to see the company invest money in huge new platforms and systems, and everything starts to come together and work better. That's the scale and expand. And we're expanding customer base as well as our footprint in the marketplace. And those are the 6 life cycles of every business. In our next session, we're going to dig in and we're going to talk about how to listen to what your company is saying and how to position yourself so that I know what the company's doing. What must I do to stay relevant? What must I do to help and continue as the company grows? I get to grow too. So for homework, yes, there is homework, but it's really easy. Following our session today, you're going to receive this link in an email, or you can copy it here. And it's a link to the workbook. And the workbook really is everything that we talked about today. And also, there is an assignment. And the assignment is to exercise the 3 rules of listening in every conversation that you have from now until we come together again. Every conversation, you're going to give yourself a listening grade every day. And you're going to see, how did I respond? Did I create space? Did I hold space? And did I leave space? right? The goal is never to be a perfect speaker. Never to be a perfect listener, because we're never going to be a perfect listener. The goal is to get better. The goal is to listen to the right people, listen to the right conversations, and then really act in that, operate from that place. It's about holding space for people. This is a quote from my mom, and my mom says often that if you listen long enough, the real story and the real people will show up, right? And sometimes we're listening and we're not listening, and so we never get to realize what the real story is because we didn't listen. And we also sometimes don't know who that real person is because we didn't listen long enough. So I'm going to break for some questions, I think. And, let's kind of see where everybody is, answer some questions. And let's see here. Stop. Okay. All right. So what questions can I answer? Come on camera, and let's talk about this listening thing. How's everybody feeling?
I will come off first. Once again, you did an amazing job. This is my second opportunity to be able to hear you speak in such an impactful delivery. And I know that it was definitely eye-opening for, I'm sure, not only me, but everyone on this call. You don't know what you don't know until you come into a room like this and you realize I haven't really been paying attention to what listening really is before now. So definitely thank you. Again, a job well done. I do have a question. How does active listening differ from passive listening, and why is it important?
That's a good question. I think we confuse the two, or we think that one is better than the other, right? And it really depends on the situation. So I'll tell you, instead of telling you what they are, I'll tell you where they fit. How about that? So passive listening is where say you're listening to a friend who called to tell you about their day. Right? You talk to your friend and you're like, hey girl, how's your day? And she starts to tell you about her day. Now, she may not want you to fix anything. She may not ask you for any advice, but you are listening. And at the end of that conversation, you can tell somebody what she talked about. That's passive listening, right? Active listening is more interactive. So think of active listening as a brainstorming session where you're in a room with a bunch of people and you're focused on some goal, but everybody's got ideas and you have to listen and you have to say, yeah, but this and what about that? And everybody's contributing and everybody's listening. So part of your listening with active listening is actually contributing, right? You got to hear it, but you also have to get active and have some conversation. So that's kind of the two. So if your company, say you're having the quarterly town hall meeting where they're talking about the company's budget or whatever, that's more of a passive conversation, passive listening. And so, yes, you will come away with something, but not a whole lot for you to do, right? And I think we have to, leave room for people's imperfections. And we all talk about, I think we're all one of those 8 category types, right? I think if we're honest, we've all done all of those 8 things. But I also think that we have to be careful as leaders that now that we know that this is there, that we don't start judging other folks, right? You're not listening because this happened. And in reality, you have to leave room for people's personality. And I'll use myself as an example. My superpower lends itself to ADHD. Okay. So one of the ways that I manage my superpower, which I love because I'm always thinking, always moving, and I love that. But you and I, Deidre, could be having a conversation. And part of my superpower is while you're talking, something might come up. And so you might see me take a pen and I'm still looking at you, but I'm writing down what just popped in my head because it's important and I don't want to forget it. It's about you. It's about this conversation that we're having. And so, while somebody might look at that and go, you're multitasking, really that's leaving room for my superpower, right? And so we've got to be careful that we don't lump people into a box and say you're not actively listening or you're passively listening when in reality they're processing.
Thank you.
Good question. Hey, what else? I know we talked about body language as well. I just briefly touched on it. But one of the things that when you're holding space and creating space, you have to pay attention to the other person's body language, right? Because one of the, what typically happens is if somebody is defensive or they're feeling anxious or afraid, their body language will show that. And your job is not to match energy. It's never to match energy. I know that's the thing we say, I'm doing this, no, as a leader, we don't get to match energy. What happens if somebody is defensive and they're talking to you like this and their arms are folded and they've got the look, your job is to lean in and open up, right? When you speak back or you're asking questions to clarify, you have to open your arms. You can't do the same thing, right? Because now you're just two people closed. You never created space. You never invited them in. So the best thing you can do is pay attention to someone's body language and then decide, how do I maneuver? How do I get this comfortable, right? How do I make this safe? So if the person is this, you should be this. Everything you say should be wide open, inviting them in. And it doesn't mean getting in their face and violating their space, but it does mean that you can't do the same thing, right? Because now nobody's getting anywhere and I don't look like I'm even listening. Okay. All right. So what else? I see Laditra.
Hey, so how do you do that in a virtual environment where so much of the conversation is based on your tone? And for me, I have a bit of a firm is what I'm gonna say. Others may say aggressive, but we're not gonna go that route. How do you show up as open when you are perceived as aggressive when you're trying to respond not in that space? I hope that made sense.
It does. And I think we spend a lot of time trying to change, right? And I say all the time, if 10 people are telling you that you're too aggressive, you might be too aggressive, right? If 10 people tell you that are close to you. If you've got one person that my tone, they're not the kind of person that wants to hear it straight. I need to put some sugar and some syrup on that thing and serve it differently. In that space, that's for one person. And when you're interacting with that person, you let them lead the conversation and then you mirror exactly what they're doing, right? Unless they're, like this. But if they're talking and they're nodding, you nod, right? If they're laughing, you laugh. If they're smiling, you smile. You start to mirror because what happens in the brain of the other person is they find familiar. They're like, oh, this person's doing, they're doing exactly what I'm doing. So you start to mirror. Now, again, if you've heard it and it's in your performance review that you're too aggressive, you might have to change some things, right? And again, I think it's your superpower because usually how we show up in the world, as long as we're not frightened while it's happening, right? Because that's a defense mechanism. But I'm very direct when I need to be. I'll send you a muffin basket tomorrow, right? But I'm going to tell you what I need to tell you today, right? And sometimes it is the muffin basket, right? And I'm honest. You have to be honest with people and say, hey, if somebody says, you come across really, really aggressive when we talk, and then you say, hey, I know that I might come across aggressive. Can we talk it through? And you have the right to tell me to tone it. You have a right to say, that's a little bit too much. And you and I talking, we can do that, right? Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
Got it. But we're not about change. We're about growth. Right?
Absolutely.
People always say you need to change, but I personally believe over the age of 25, change is over, right? It's about growth because you're who you are, hardwired, and now it's time to grow into the best version of yourself. Cool. What else? Hey,
Hi.
Trinity.
How are you?
Good.
Good. So good to see you again. Excellent information as normal. And I know that it was because I often feel so called out sometimes. I'm like, oh, I feel attacked. So I think as a leader, I'm still trying to find a balance between creating all this space for this active listening, right? And making sure that I'm being engaged, but also trying to teach brevity and being brief and set, like, we have careers that are very fast moving. So, how do you kind of find striking a balance between creating that space, but also like understanding that we do have to keep up with like an ever-changing environment? So with that being said, how can I find ways to communicate effectively? Still, but briefly, but still, it still comes off genuine and trying to be effective in my listening.
Yeah, I think, when we talk about active listening and creating space, we don't create space all day, every day. We are not therapists, okay? So there are, if this is in those situations where someone needs, they have a problem, they have a situation, or they're, even if it's like performance, where we're talking and we're listening. But I also think as the leader, you get to control the conversation. One of the things that I do in starting conversations, and particularly with people that I know are long-winded or are going to burglarize my time, I come into the conversation with a timestamp, right? And say, hey, I know we're connecting today. I would love to chat, but I need to share that I only have 30 minutes. So, can we, if we don't finish today, I'll pick it up next week, or we'll pick it up in a couple days, or whatever that looks like. But really, putting the time limit on it and saying, hey, I know we're talking, but I got to share that I've only got 30 minutes or only got an hour, or whatever that looks like. And then as they start to overshare, and it starts to get long, ask for the big thing. Right? Say, I totally understand what you're saying, but since we only have 10 more minutes, what's the big thing? What can I really do to help? Right? And sometimes it's nothing. And then sometimes they say, and then you can say, you know what? Let me go back and see what I can do. Let me talk about it. And sometimes the answer is just no, right? I get it. Like if you're asking me, Andrea, I need you to be 5'10", right? There's nothing I can do to change my height, nothing. And so I'm going to still listen and ask questions. Why do you think I need to be 5'10"? What's really, what does a 5'10" versus a 4'11" have, right? And I'm asking all the questions. So I hear you say, so I'm understanding you. And then at the end, I say, I appreciate that. I know it probably wasn't easy coming to tell me that I'm too short. And I do understand that. However, right, there's nothing I can do about it. So how do we move forward with me being 4'11"? Right? And sometimes we can't move forward, and that's okay too. We let it play out. But as the leader, especially when it comes to things like performance and metrics and things like that, attendance, you can listen and hold space, but at the end of that conversation, you might have to say, I still need you to come to work because you're on a final for attendance, right? And the next time, there's nothing I'm going to be able to do to help. So how can I help you now before we get there, right? So sometimes it's not about finding a solution. It's not, sometimes it's just about hearing, and there is nothing you can do. But yeah, that's a great question.
No, thank you. And I definitely love kind of understanding the difference, because you do know when you need to set aside a little bit more time for those who may have a little bit more feedback, right? So I think that was great. Thank you so much.
You got it. You got it. What else? Anything? Cool. All right. Shanta, you hanging out there?
I
Yes.
am
Back
here.
over to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate this. This is the first series, and we had up to over 53 people on the webinar today. So I thank you all for taking your time to listen to this series. Please share it with a peer, colleague. These are free webinars that we're providing for you all. We do have another one that's coming up in July, so we'll send the information out, and then we have the final one in September. I noticed in the chat that someone wanted to know if we have the material. If you go to the link that Andrea provided, you will have the PDF, and it is the presentation information there. And thank you for recording this, because I did not get the opportunity to record it, but I'll make sure I'll troubleshoot the next time so we can have all of them. We'll save them in our library and share it out to you all via email. And I just also want to say, please take the time to complete the survey. Your feedback to us is a gift. We really want to know that we're bringing you information that resonates with you all. So please just take 2 minutes to take the survey. You can take it. It's in the link. Jennifer has already shared it. And then lastly, remember our June 4th event. It's free dinner, free professional headshot, fireside chat with Val Warner. It's going to be fun. So get everyone out. Everyone's so used to being at home. I know, Laditra, you're in Georgia. We don't have a virtual option, but I do think everyone that has joined, and if you're in the Chicago area, highly encourage you come to our location in Schaumburg. We will be sending out the registration link soon, so make sure you all check your email. Once again, share it. They can be outside of Comcast. We're looking to grow our membership, not just with Comcast members, but other organizations. So we're looking to make sure that we're including everyone. So once again, thank you guys for taking the time. We'll get this recording set up for you all. Don't forget to go to the website to get your PDF download book. I can't thank you enough for sharing all the information you shared with us today. And I know that everyone took a nugget away today that I will make sure that I practice my multitasking listening skills to be more present in the moment and show up at work and show up the same at home, because I tend to do two different things. Mm-hmm. At work, I'm showing up different. When I come home, my husband's like, put the phone down. You don't do that at work. So I'm learning. So I definitely know he'll appreciate the new things that I will try to make sure that I am being more of an active listener. So once again, thanks, team, for joining. We'll give you 3 minutes to get your time back, and we'll see you on the next webinar. And hopefully I'll see some of you on June 4th. You guys have a great rest of the week. Bye now, everyone.
Goodbye, everybody.